All right, we're going to get this thing started today. Welcome to everybody who's here with us. At last count, we had over 125 people register for this webinar and discussion. It's kids at home until fall. Now what? And that's working from home, kids at home, anxiety, stress, self-care, isolation, social distancing, and so much more. Again, welcome. We're glad that you're all with us. I want to take just a second to introduce our panelist. First is Dr. Lena Pearlman. She is my wife, better half, business partner, and a therapist for over 20 years. So welcome to you, Lena.
Hey, thank you.
All right, we have Rebecca Daugherty. She's waving to you right now. She is also a very talented therapist. She works with us at our practice, involved in so many other things within the community, as a parent, involved in emergency planning things on the state and also a national level. So we welcome you with us, Rebecca.
Thanks.
All right, and we have Mike Dietrich. He is a school principal here in St. Louis, a great guy, great principal, very innovative, runs an amazing school that I've had the opportunity to visit with on several occasions. We also were at Principals Leadership together, and he made sure that I wasn't eaten by a bear out in the woods. So for all those reasons and so many more, we're glad that Mike's joining us today. Hey, Mike.
Hello, how are you?
Doing great, doing great. So we'll get started. There were some questions that came in before we even set this up or as we were setting this up. So I want to start with those questions. Then if there's any other questions that anybody has, you can use the chat box, the question and answer box, or you can text me. My number's right on the screen there. If anything comes up after the webinar, questions that you have, anything else, my email address is on here. You can reach out anytime. We'd be happy to help, and so on and so forth. So first question, we're going to jump right into this. This came to us earlier this week. It says, our family is fighting pretty much all of the time. I know that this is related to being in a quarantine. What can we do to make this more manageable? So we're talking about some family fighting. Let's start with Rebecca on this one. What thoughts do you have for the person who sent this question in?
Well, my initial thought is, yeah, happening here at this household too. Yeah, more than usual. And again, this is not a normal situation. And so kids, teens, and young adults show anxiety in different ways. And one way is by snapping back, by having a higher level of irritability, lower tolerance. We're also in confined spaces together. So, before the pandemic, we were used to a lot of space, whether it was space at school, sports, activities. And now our space has really, really shrunk to within our house and maybe a little bit outside. So yeah, it's absolutely normal. What can be done about it? I think certainly looking at some type of routine. And a routine's different than a schedule. Routine offers guidelines, offers boundaries, and some structure. And I think having potentially a family meeting to say, what are some times and where are some spaces within the house where we can all separate and go to our corners and have our own time. And that's where I would begin.
Great advice. And how about you, Lena? Do you have anything to add to that?
Every time I talk to people about, how things are going at home, I get that question. Things are, the kids are stir crazy. We're stir crazy. We feel, trapped. We feel caved in. And I get it 100%, totally understand. And since we don't know when this might change for us, I'm strongly recommending that we just take it day by day and ask the question every day, what can we do today that's going to make life just a little bit easier for us? How can we engage with one another today to do something fun, to do something educational, to do something that we've never done before, to play a game we haven't played for a while, and also to give ourselves that time away from each other too. There's got to be room for all of that in there. We are literally inventing something that we've never had to deal with before. So every day is a new day. So I really strongly encourage everyone to just take it one day at a time.
Also really good advice. Hey, Mike, in the perspective of as a school principal and also as a parent, what might you have to add to this one?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, we're not used to spending this much time with the people that we're in a house with, right? Typically when we spend this much time with my wife and my kids and my dog, we're on vacation somewhere and it's having fun. And while I'm enjoying the time with my family, the expectations are very different, right? Because just like parents are managing workloads at home, or they're one of our essential workers and they're a nurse and, they're also living with fear, you know, that's scary for all of us, but this is different for us. I think the thing for my family and what I've been trying to encourage is making sure just everybody in the house has a voice, whether that's helping set up the menu for the week, whether it's their voice on what game we're going to play that evening. And sometimes those just happen by chance. I brought home this giant whiteboard for my makeshift office at home and ended up turning it into the best thing at home because we're playing Pictionary on it all the time. We've never played Pictionary, but it's been a blast for us as a family. So I would just say, make sure everybody in the house at some point or another throughout the day has a voice.
And all great advice from all of you. Thank you. Next question that came in is, I'm really concerned that my son is not going to be prepared for his freshman year of college since he hasn't really been in school since the middle of March. What advice do you have for preparing for college in the next few months? Maybe we'll start with Mike on that one as an educator, and maybe take this beyond just the thought of, I've got a high school senior who's going to be a college student, but maybe parents in all the different levels, maybe going from elementary to middle or middle to high school, and this fear of, are they prepared for the next grade, and what are they supposed to do in the time that we do have? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as a building leader and as an educator, I'm going to realize that the sixth graders that are coming into our building next year, there's going to be some things that we need to make up with them, right? Because we're not focusing on all standards at this point. It's really important that districts are focusing on the essential standards. These are the standards that kids need to know before they move to the next grade level. So I understand that as a middle school principal. I know our high school principal, we've had those conversations, and he's like, Mike, have your teachers meet with my teachers and go over what are the essential standards those kids need to know. And I would hope that our colleges, they understand that as well, because they may have a freshman going to their sophomore year that has some gaps, because, nothing beats a high quality educator in front of a group of kids, right? As good as we are, my kids have 2 certified teachers at home. It's still not as good as having them in school and going through what they would typically get in a school day. So I think we're just going to have an understanding as an educational system that we're going to have to fill some gaps and we're going to get kids caught up.
Lena or Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say that it's important to acknowledge that concern with the kids. It's important to acknowledge that concern with ourselves, because it's true. We've never been here before. We don't have a blueprint that we're working off of. Everything is just sort of happening, and we can only take it as it's happening. And educators, are in the same space as we are. We will do the very best that we can do to, I don't even know if catch up is the right word, but certainly help kids and families get to where they need to go once we're all able to get back. But it's going to look different, and acknowledging that and accepting that, is going to be key here.
Yeah, great answers from both of you. Rebecca, do you have anything to add?
I think, all of it is well said. I think it's important too, as parents, to reach out to wherever the next step is and stay engaged and in those conversations, that whether it's teachers, faculty, or staff that are going to obviously have to plan and prepare for the fall semester if everybody is going back into fall. I am adjunct at a local university, and there are many discussions university-wide about, do we do on-campus teaching in the fall? Do we not? What does this look like? So a lot of it still is up in the air. But I think as a parent, make sure that you are engaged on some level and follow maybe their emails, or maybe reaching out to the school to say, hey, I just want to make sure, is there anything we should be doing? Or will you have listening sessions or, in-school meetings, so we can also help our kids prepare?
It definitely sounds like these are discussions at the school and district and even at the college level that are going on right now, and having that, maybe to reassure the person that sent this question in, is that we're all in this together. We're probably all, if you want to say, behind, or we all have covered these certain amount of essential things. And like, like you all said, and like Mike said, so long as those conversations are going on, where we're handing kids off, from and to, that we're connecting those are definitely very important. Before I jump into the next question, I do want to remind everybody who's on this discussion, chat, webinar thing, that you can send questions through the chat, through the Q&A, or you can also text them. My number's up there. I've got a few more questions that were sent in advance, and then we'll be ready to field any questions that you might have. And here's a question that was sent in, and I've heard this from like all of my friends and colleagues, and it seems like this is a universal thing. So the question is, my daughter is staying up until 3 a.m. every night. Is this really a problem because she's sleeping until noon every day? And maybe we'll start this one with Lena. What are your thoughts on that, going to bed at 3 a.m. and sleeping until noon?
I don't think that it's a one shoe fits all, right? Everyone's responsibilities, everyone's schedules are going to be looking a little bit different. And I think that it's an important time to really adapt to how we function best, because fortunately or unfortunately, we have the time to do so. And so I have heard this a lot, actually, where, the kids are staying up much later than they normally would because they can sleep in and get that full rest, as long as that's what's happening. And then they get up and they do their schoolwork and they do their chores and they have their fun and they do whatever else. And I guess as long as our children are getting the rest that they need and it's not disruptive to a schedule that they have going on and a routine that's working for them as well as the family, I don't want to be saying, oh no, it's more appropriate to go to bed at 10 and wake up at 8, because right now things are different and we have to own that.
Absolutely, absolutely. What do you think, Rebecca, on that one?
So I agree with Lena. I think it is family dependent. Families are making a lot of accommodations on so many different levels now, with, parents, trying to help teach from home to working. And so everybody's schedules are off. I would say what is important is to look at the larger picture here also. And at some point in time, when a version of school does resume, or if they're continuing on into the workforce, if they're, beyond, teenage years or further, to really look at how is this going to impact them over time. Especially teenagers, this is when their circadian rhythm really begins changing. So if you're allowing for the 3 a.m. bedtime and they're getting the proper 10 to 12 hours of sleep, and that's working for your family, again, I agree with Lena then that seems to work. But also be prepared. How do you scale that back? And then again, alter their circadian rhythm cycle so that they can fit within whatever school system or work system that they'll be participating in when this pandemic, I shouldn't say is over, but when these at-home orders are lifted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Mike, there's a lot of research out there, and we've all heard about it, being that you're a middle school principal, that already we're waking kids up earlier than they should, and that, they're supposed to be better performing if they sleep in more, and then they could stay up later, but because of jobs and sports, those all play a part. Younger siblings and meeting someone there at the bus stop, factoring all that in, along with this question, what are your thoughts about the changing sleep patterns that people are doing as they are doing this home school, home life type thing?
Yeah, I think even in my house, we've been more relaxed on that. not to the point of kids going to bed at 3 a.m. But at the same time, I know I have a student at school who has adapted to the family schedule because of their family work schedule, right? So if that student wants a parent to be able to help them with homework, and that parent is working a 11 to 8 o'clock shift, that's a pretty wide shift there that the kid doesn't have opportunity. So, that kid's kind of went to their sleep schedule of staying up till 2 in the morning and then being able to work with their parent when they get home from school or when they get home from work. So I think Rebecca kind of said that is there's a lot of family dependency here. So sometimes that's out of necessity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so we're going to move on. We have 2 more questions that were sent in, then I'm going to go and look through the chat, Q&A, and the text and see what else is coming through. Here's a question. I am being as strong as I can for my family, but I am starting to feel overwhelmed, anxious, and stressed. I don't have any answers, and I'm struggling to see the light at the end of the tunnel. What can I do to start feeling better? Maybe we'll start that one with Rebecca. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. In our lifetime, this hasn't happened before. So to create expectations on how you should respond, there is some concern there, and kind of backing away from right now more than ever. There is no perfect parenting, and there's no perfect response to this pandemic, and so maybe giving yourself a little bit of a break. I don't want to minimize the symptoms, and I think those are really important to address. What are they? Is it, I'm having trouble falling asleep, I'm becoming more irritable. What do I need to do? And yes, if you're a parent and you have kids that you also have to take care of, and you have a household and you have work and whatever, it does get overwhelming. And there can be time carved out, even 10 minutes of time for yourself to take a breather. And I think that's a really good place to begin.
Okay, so what are other thoughts, panelists? Any other thoughts on that one?
I think Rebecca said it. This is an opportunity for us to really make sure that we are taking care of ourselves when we can, how we can. And that is the best that we can do.
And I guess I'll jump in that the same thing. I totally agree with everything you guys have said, that this notion, whatever a perfect parent is, I'm not really sure that that exists at all, but just doing the best that we can and being open and honest and kind of just processing together and just, again, and I've heard this from the panelists, I hear this from Lena all the time, just taking things one day at a time and being present, being in the moment. And that's the best that we can do at this point. The last question I have here, I know that some others have popped on my phone and on the chat and Q&A thing here. What can schools do to be prepared for bringing students back in the fall? I'm concerned that many of our students will have significant lasting impact from this traumatic and stressful situation. So Mike, I'm gonna go back to you as the practicing principal on the panel here. Like, what are your thoughts? What are the kind of conversations that schools and districts, are having? And is this trauma piece and mental health needs, are these concerns being addressed or planned for right now? Because if we can start back in the fall, there were kids that had trauma concerns and mental health and behavior concerns before COVID and Corona and all this stuff. So what are schools and districts, and kind of what's on your mind as to what you might be expecting when kids come back, if they come back in August?
Well, I think it starts with what we're doing now. And that's making sure, I think we all know that things are based off relationships, right? So I think it's about maintaining those healthy relationships now with our students, with our parents, with our teachers, because right now we're sitting here with like this sense of loss, right? We've lost all this personal contact. And people are struggling. Well, let me take that back. Some people are struggling with it. Some students, when we just recently surveyed, they're like, hey, this is great. I'm pretty introverted and I'm working at my own pace and I'm living my best life right now, right? But there's also students who are very extroverted who rely on those relationships. So I think it goes with what we're doing right now, that we're maintaining those relationships so that when they do walk back in our doors, we have that sense of trust and they still have a trusted adult that they can go to and talk to. And I think that's the biggest thing, is what we're doing right now is preparing us for that day they walk back in through the door. I don't want to sit here and just plan for that day.
Absolutely. Great thoughts there. Anything, Lena, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's really spot on. I think that the relationships that we build, have been building, continue to build, and will build once we're back in the school setting is going to make all the difference.
Yeah, my only hope is that the school social workers, school counselors are involved to address, what's being described as small doses of microtrauma along the way regarding this pandemic, because you have stress, you have loss, and you have prolonged social isolation. So I get it. The introverted kids who are like, I'm living my best life. I was built for this. However, pieces and small doses of socialization are important. And I'm hopeful that, like I said, the school counselors, school social workers will be able to have a part in that.
There's a question that came through on text, and let's see. So this is dealing with divorced or separated families and how to handle a co-parent who is far less concerned about COVID-19 than the other parent. What strategies do you suggest to bridge the gap, just as trying to negotiate or work together as co-parent, but also trying to keep children safe? So let's start this one maybe with Lena. What are your thoughts on this with divorced co-parent, where parents just aren't seeing eye to eye on this, and one is taking this much more seriously and one is perhaps a lot more lax about things? What do you think about that? What advice would you have?
I think it's important as much as possible, if possible, for those co-parents to be together in terms of the message that they're sending the child. Even if they disagree, even if they have different perspectives of what's going on, it would be most helpful to be able to spread a common message. And if that's not possible, then the child deserves to, I guess, hear from both parents, right? And just hear, this is how I feel about it, and this is how dad might feel about it, and not in in a way so that we're educating our children and not scaring them, because this is a scary time.
Rebecca, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that. And I think, unfortunately, part of the reality right now is that guardian ad litems and lawyers are involved in these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And it is sad, and you feel for the minors in these cases. And yeah, I completely agree with what Lena had to say regarding messaging.
Mike, do you see, are you hearing a lot from families of, parents of your students with similar concerns to this? And if so, how is that kind of being addressed?
I got to be honest, every interaction I've had so far, not that I live in this utopia, but every interaction I've had with parents at our school have been so supportive, and have not had any pushback at all about us being away from school. I think our parents, unless they're just not saying it to me, understand the importance right now of why we have to be apart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's just such a difficult one when the going's going well, relatively, and having this kind of disagreement where there are major repercussions, and, just making sure that there is that meeting in the middle, or if you have to get people involved to negotiate this just to ensure, number one, the safety of the children is really important. I'm going to start firing off on some of the questions here. There's a question that says, what part will the social worker have? They too have never gone through this. Their role would be ... So Rebecca, what role will the social worker be in going through all of this?
Well, I think if you're talking about a school social worker, I'm not one, but as a parent, I would like to see that the school social worker is able to be a part of this welcome back process and this reintegration into the school building and into the classroom and into a learning routine. I think it would be important for the school social worker to be, in a sense, able or have tools to screen and to follow up with kids as needed.
And just to add to that, also hopefully have an opportunity to also meet with parents as this reintegration process, especially anyone that they may be more concerned with for whatever the reason might be.
And Mike, maybe there have been discussions that you're familiar with perhaps the school social workers or the others, the outside organizations that support students in your school. Have there been some of these conversations of determining who's going to be providing what service and maybe as their roles might be changing? Has that occurred yet?
We haven't had those conversations yet about what it looks like when kids really re-enter the building. I think for us, the same way parents at home are still trying to get a grasp on the changes in our life as a school system, we're still trying to figure out how we best deliver instruction at home or provide curriculum to parents at home. But I'm sure as time goes on, we're going to really get in depth with those conversations and how do we identify those kids when they walk back in the door.
Absolutely. There's a bunch of questions coming in through text and also through the chat. And just a reminder, if you have any, get them up there. We'll answer as many as we can. There seems to be a consistent theme among questions coming in through the chat, through my phone and so forth here, really talking about, when we have some kids now that are preparing to go into a new school, whether that's they're moving into a new neighborhood or whether they're moving from an elementary to middle to high school. And under, again, perfect circumstances or normal times, we should say, that's a pretty stressful thing for kids to be dealing with anyway. But especially since we're adding in the fold of many of us left school middle of March, they're going to start in August or September. We're still not sure what that's going to look like if school sizes, class sizes are smaller, if we're not doing assemblies or different things. So as just people in the community or as school staff, what is it that we can be doing to help kids going from this remote thing, right, their school, remote thing, new school because they moved or new school because they aged up? What are the kind of things that we could be doing to help this transition? Because again, during normal times, this isn't an easy one. Mike, what are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think the biggest thing is we need to be intentional. We're having conversations across the district with admin and teachers about what can we be very purposeful and intentional with. So some examples of what we're doing, our elementary principal has been doing a read aloud for our early childhood second graders who are coming in next year. I did a read aloud that we sent out to our elementary students, just kind of as a, hey, here's your middle school principal. You may be going to him next year. If not, you're going to him in a couple years. So here's a familiar face. So we're doing that to try to build those relationships. I've started including our sixth graders in on our emails from our building. One of the fun things we're doing is I'm a big believer in take your job serious, but yourself lightly. So I know, Bryan, I saw on your Facebook page, you use the Sway app. And I did a Sway dance the other day and I sent that out to students and parents, but I included our sixth graders on it. And every Friday we have a different teacher doing a Friday celebration dance and celebrating that we're getting through this remote learning. And we send that out on our Facebook. We send it out on our email. And because we want people to know those relationships and feel safe with who they're sending their kids to. And part of that is seeing that we're real human beings, right? And then also that it's not just emails. One of our plans right now is this week between me and my assistant principal, we're calling home to every single family in our in our building. When that's completed, we're moving on to sixth grade just to say, hey, we know that we didn't have sixth grade family night. We just want to reach out. Here's our little plan. This is how we're moving forward, so that we continue to maintain that communication. They hear voice, they see video, they see text, and we're getting them through multiple ways.
That sounds like you've got a lot already going on there. And I know just from familiarity with you and your school, you have so many of those pieces and you guys are very intentional, even during normal times, just getting past the anxiety or stress or fear of the unknown. So kudos to you and to the other school people out there who are doing similar. I'll kind of bounce this to Lena. So they're kind of talking about the transition from what the school can do. What can other people, what would you recommend if maybe you had a teen client who's struggling with this and anxiety is growing about this transition to high school? Again, during a normal time, they would have high anxiety about it, but adding in the fold that they didn't really finish what they were doing, and it's now this prolonged period, and getting in these habits of being at home, trying to get people back to school. What kind of advice would you have for parents out there or other school staff members?
I think first and foremost, we are all transitioning. We are all impacted by this differently and similarly. And we're legitimately all going through this together. And so I think first and foremost, it's really important to let them know that I get it. We get it. And find a space where we can not just help them, but let them see that we are all struggling in some way, because that's very healthy. um, I think that there's going to be a lot, I hope there's going to be a lot of communication, a lot of information, a lot of education, that everyone working together for a common cause, which is to help our students transition, as we are all going to be transitioning back into whatever life is going to look like when this moves forward. So really just having great communication between all the people, the educators, the therapists, the teachers, the parents, the students, especially those students that are moving from, into high school or into college and are in a different mind frame than some of the elementary and middle school students. But really just being able to show them and not just tell them that we're all transitioning. This is new for all of us.
Great suggestions. Absolutely. Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was really well said. The only thing I would add is I see a lot, especially with kids that are transitioning maybe from one school to the other or graduating. A lot of times, because that's a ritual, through the ritual, you're able to put closure on leaving fifth grade and going to middle school or whatever it may be. And I hope that at some point in time, even if it's just a conversation about allowing the child or the student to walk through verbally a concept of closure as they move on to the next level, I think is going to be really important.
Because you said that, it came to mind that kids are grieving. They're grieving the loss of what was their normalcy and their friends and the way things used to be and the education that they were getting and how they were getting it. And we as adults are also grieving because we've had a loss. This is different. And so going through that grief process, I think in transitioning back to school, even beforehand, I think is going to be really important. Acknowledging it and working through it. And the communication piece of that, I think, is going to be really huge.
Yeah, these are really good questions, and panelists, great answers to these. Kind of skimming through some of the questions up in the chat, and again, there's a chat box. We'll get to as many of those as we can. As time permits, you can text them over. It's kind of a two-part question. Maybe we'll tackle the first part of this. Do you have any suggestions for bringing us all together to celebrate being back, to talking, not ignoring what we've all been through? So, wow, it's a really good question about suggestions for bringing us together. Celebrate, connect, reconnect, and then talking about, which it seems like, historically, maybe back in the day, it was kind of like, we're going to ignore this. Let's shelter the kids from what? But I guess it's a really good question for you, Mike, as you're thinking about ways to celebrate being back and also to kind of have these conversations about what people have been through. And for those who maybe have had relatives, neighbors, friends who've suffered, perhaps even those that may know someone that's passed away, where's that balance between celebrating, being able to talk real about what we've been through, but perhaps maybe not re-traumatizing kids? What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
Right. I think part of that is allowing for time to process now. All of our classes have daily check-ins. So that way they have a chance now to say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. That's one of the ways we're able to keep up with what's going on at home right now, right? And being able to get our social worker, our counselor involved. So it's, a lot of the conversation is about what are we going to do when kids come back to school? But so much of that is set up by what we're doing now. And what we've done in the past. So I think schools that have dug into trauma-informed care, I think schools who have dug into understanding what circles are and repair circles and how to have conversations where everyone has a voice, I think those are the schools that are really going to be set up well to take on this when kids do walk back in the door. And not just kids walking back in the door, it's the teachers walking back in the door and being, how have things changed, right? Because it's almost like the first day of school times 10 for us as well, right? And even down to our custodians and the principal, right? We've all had some type of interaction throughout this process that, when we go into education, we don't say, hey, it'd be great if I had a couple months away from kids, right? This is hard on us. I'd much rather be at school talking with kids. So I think the schools and the teachers that have put the time in ahead to understand restorative practices, trauma-informed care, and have built those strong relationships, those are going to be the ones that really do well when we head back into the hallways of school.
I want to segue that piece, and I completely agree with you, Mike, and it is great to know that there's a lot of thought being put into this. And so forth, and knowing what we're probably going to be walking into as we return. But there's another question that's kind of a really nice segue. And this one says, how does it look to work through the grief process? Or how does it look to walk through grieving? And what might that look like? So maybe we'll start that one with Lena. So kind of making the connection between what Mike said and just trying to think, how do we work through the grief process or grieving?
I think we're all working through it, whether we call it that or not right now. It started when no one really knew what was going to happen. So, some of us would say things like, it'll be fine. It's just like the flu. Or we're not really going to not have school, right? And so that transitions into, wow, I'm really ticked off. I don't get to hang out with my friends. I can't even go outside and play with anybody. I'm pissed off. Into then, well, maybe we'll go back in 2 weeks. Well, maybe it'll go back in, a month. Maybe the school year won't be completely over. And then feeling really sad when we're getting additional information about the fact that, this may take a lot longer than we thought. And maybe we're not now going to go back to school like we had hoped we would. And I think that this process, this grieving process, is going to continue on when we make the transition back into whatever it's going to look like when we're back at school and back at work. And we're going to have to go through this process is to allow our children, allow the adults, allow the teachers, allow the administrators to talk through it and be able to talk about how they felt and be able to talk about how they feel, and have someone there who can listen and who can empathize.
Absolutely. Anything to add to that, Rebecca?
No, I think, both have really nailed this with it's about communication. It's about sharing your thoughts, sharing your feelings. And through that process, there's a part of normalization that can take place as you go and bounce through some of these stages of grief and loss.
And a connection, because we are all going through it.
Sure.
So a question came in, was texted to me, and it says, what can we do as parents to help with continuing the learning process through the summer, and with the thought of trying to avoid the summer slide, which we've all heard about, right? We have the school structure that we have now originally because we needed kids and families to work in the farms, right? That's why we had this long summer off. And while there still are people working the farms, I would say a very large portion of the population has just been using this structure because that's just the way we've always done it. So, our school year is going to end at some point in May or June, depending on where you are in this country. There will be a gap, a summer, and an opportunity for that summer slide. So Mike, what are some things once the school year is over, between us starting back, whether in person or through, this video format, what could families and parents and communities be doing to minimize that summer slide, which quite frankly may be larger than it's been in the past because our kids aren't in the buildings for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that there's this idea already that schools have given up on summer school and what that looks like. I think the same way we're looking at things differently for remote learning here to end the year, there's districts out there that are already discussing, can we still do summer school and can we do that remotely and what does that look like? I think if parents are concerned about, summer loss or summer slide, depending on what term you want to use for it, I'm going to go back to our first webinar and say, hey, parents, take it easy on yourself, right? You can't put the whole weight on your shoulders, but if you need to do something, make sure your kid's reading, right? So of all things, just make sure they're reading. If they do that over the summer, there is so much research to support that that's one of the best things you can do to maintain or keep kids from having that summer loss.
And a good point, going back to the last webinar we did, that there are ways that now, and even in the summer, where kids are learning things that may look different than textbook learning. And like, I don't remember which panelist brought this up last time, like for the older kids, balancing a checkbook or, making recipes into food. There's math involved in that. Journaling, writing in a journal. I know Lena had a journal get published earlier this year, something like a format like that, where you're having people write and doing these things and reflecting. So it's helping the mental health, but it's also helping with the academics. So it just seems like there's so many opportunities to learn, even maybe not in the way that we would say is a conventional sense on that. There are a bunch more questions. I know we touched on this. I do want to maybe cover this just a little bit more, and going a little bit beyond the teachers and principals and school social workers and counselors. I feel like a lot of people in this field kind of have this gladiator mentality, and in so many ways that's a great thing. But what is our process? What's our plan, if there is one, for really helping them? So often we say we're kid first, which we should be. But if we're the administration, and if we're kid first, but the adults aren't really the focal point, or the adults are struggling or hurting or have the needs of their own, what's the value of the adult to the kid if they have their own issues that they're dealing with? We're notorious in this field, like on that airplane, about putting your mask on first, and teachers and all these people aren't really good at that, right? They can say it and understand it, but they're always going to help the kid first. So this may be a good question to start with the therapists on the panel. Like, what should we be doing with the grown people when they come back, before they come back? How are we making sure that they're okay to be working with our students? Because even if they are gladiators, as someone mentioned earlier, they're not immune to this. So Lena, what would you be recommending to schools for them to be helping their staff before they arrive and when they arrive? What would you be doing?
I mean, I would love to be counseling the teachers, counseling the administrators, giving them support, because they need it too. There's no such thing as perfect, and so there's no such thing as anyone sliding through this without any kind of repercussion. And so I think that in order for the teachers to be the best versions of themselves that they can be, having gone through this process, they need support too. And getting that support helps them, be the best versions of themselves that they can be.
Definitely. Rebecca, what are your thoughts? Anything to add to that?
Well, I think addressing the loss here too. I think we've had so many school districts where they've had either teachers or bus drivers or custodians who have died because of this pandemic. and you're not able to attend the funerals, and it's, through an email and maybe some phone conversations. And yeah, I agree. I think there needs to be something way before the first day of school to check in throughout, like Mike had talked about with the students, checking in with the students, checking in with faculty and staff to see where they're at and what they need at this moment.
Mike, is there a message that's gone out to staff, or is there an anticipation of a message to even explain what supports there might be in the community, whether a district has an EAP type program, whether they're consulting with therapists like, well, pretty much everyone on the panel but you, Mike? What are the types of things? What does that support look like? What resources do the school districts have? Because so often it feels like people don't access resources because they've never had to access resources before. They don't know what's even out there. So for these gladiators amongst us, kind of what thought has been put into that? What would you be recommending, or what's the district planning, if anything, to be prepared for support for the people, the grown folks in the building?
Yeah, we've been very consistent in our messaging as far as providing the EAP information to our staff since week one. We understand that for a lot of our teachers, I mean, they went into education because they want to enact change and help people. And now we've limited their ability to do that. And that can be stressful. So we've had our EAP. I know our assistant superintendent is very good at those things. Every email I've seen her come out with, she sends out a weekly email that says update on coronavirus, and it has the Missouri statistics. It has what we're doing as a district, as far as operating still under those guidelines. So we've been very consistent with that. We've also done little things. I know my staff, it's every Friday at 4:00. They're having a virtual get together, right? And I don't know if everybody saw the Zoom bombing article that came out. And, so we actually gave it to our superintendent, who ended up Zoom bombing our social gathering, right? So I think, right, all of a sudden they're like, wait, well, what's Dr. Hall doing here? But it's about still being able to know that people are human, right? We do a weekly check-in with our staff, myself and my assistant principal. We actually have those next Tuesday scheduled again, and we have 4 scheduled for 1 hour on that day. And teachers have to check in with us during that time. And then if they don't feel comfortable coming in as a group, because we understand as a staff, we like to socialize. So we're saying, hey, I think it's 9:00, 10:30, 1:00, and 2:30. You've got an hour. The administrators have set their time aside. Come on in, talk to us. What's going well? What's not going well? How can we help you? So that we maintain that person contact.
And these are all great answers. Absolutely. I think there's a really important thing for the gladiators out there, and I know there's a lot of them on this call. They're social workers, they're counselors, they're principals, teachers, superintendents, whatever role, parents. We're all these gladiators. Before all of this came up, I was asked, and all of the people on this panel were asked all the time to come and do trainings that touch on a lot of different things in trauma and mental health, etc. But a big push has been for self-care. What do we do for self-care? How are we doing this? And to me, beyond everything that we talked about, making sure that if you're in a leadership role, that you're modeling self-care, that you're saying that it's really important to be doing these self-care things proactively, infusing them into your day-to-day life, help you keep your window of tolerance wide open, right? So that we're feeling as good as we possibly can, and making sure that we're sending that message out that it's okay to not be okay sometimes, but we're here for you. And Mike, you're right, keeping that open door, making sure resources are available. One last question, comment, and we're going to wrap this up for this evening. I've seen a lot of questions come in through the text, through the chat box here, talking about guilt. Guilt as a parent who's also an educator who's also a parent, and other things going on, right? you may still have an elderly parent living with you with the medical condition that you're dealing with, and you're trying to deal with running a home and doing what you have to for your kids and your job, and kind of like those things where they've got the sticks and the plates on them and you're spinning too many of them and plates start falling. And that part about guilt, right? I'm not being a really good administrator or social worker or teacher, and I'm going to lose the award of parent of the year because I'm screwing everything up and I'm just not managing well. So I guess that's a really good question to kind of end with, or statement. We'll start with Rebecca. What do you tell that person that's dealing with guilt that somehow they're not monitoring their kids and their homework as much as they should, and they're struggling just to kind of get through the day? What would you be telling them who are dealing with this kind of guilt?
Yeah, I think first it would be, when we try to juggle so much, it's because we feel like we're out of control and we want to control something. We want to control everything. And there's where those perfectionistic traits come in. And sometimes they serve us well. They allow us to be that gladiator, as you had talked about. But perfectionism and being a gladiator does not mean you're resilient. You're human. And because of that, it is important to look at the day and look at the goals and say, right now, this is not a normal time. What is realistic? Because perfection is never realistic, and it's certainly not realistic now. And really take an inventory of what does the day look like, and what is a must do, what is a should do, and what can wait till later, I think is a good concrete place to begin.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so often we talk about the impact of social media on our students. I think in cases like this, it's often the impact that social media is having on our parents, because we see what other families are doing on Facebook, and they have their dry erase board up and they have all their markers set out and they have desks set up for their kids. And this is the perfect homeschooling or remote classroom, right? I can tell you, with my wife and I both as educators, that's not how we have it set up here at home. We have one student who has to sit right next to us, and we're working with him daily and making sure he's on task. And we have one who, she's like, listen, I'm going to get my work done and it's going to be good work. I'm a really good student. Just please let me live my best life. And I want to go to my room and I'm going to get it done. And you don't need to worry about me. And at the end of the day, we check her work and it's done. It's good. So I think your home is your home and it's what you're dealing with. And don't be hard on yourself, and don't be afraid to reach out to the school. I know Rebecca has said this in every webinar we've had, is don't be afraid to reach out to the school counselor. Don't be afraid to reach out to the school school counselor. I'm going to add to that. Don't be afraid to reach out to the school principal and the teachers, right? We want to help. And so the best thing you can do is stay off Facebook.
And Lena, wrapping this question up, what do you have to add?
It's a combination of what's already been said, because there's nothing more to say. You have to be kind to yourself. You have to cut yourself some slack. You have to realize that you're doing the very best that you can in an unpredictable, unprecedented situation. So you reach out to the people that you need to reach out to and get the support that you need to get, but also be kind to yourself.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank the panel. We have Dr. Lena Pearlman, myself, Dr. Bryan Pearlman, Rebecca Daugherty, Mike Dietrich. I want to carry this conversation on. If there is anything that you have questions about, anything you need, you actually have my text number on here. The office, it's with Dr. Lena Pearlman and Associates. That's stlmentalhealth.com. My email is Bryan with the Y at stlmentalhealth.com. You can reach out anytime. For those that are on Twitter, you can reach me at DRP_principal. That's Dr. P_principal. For those who are not on our Facebook group, please join us. It's a facebook.com group. You can find it by looking at Maslow before Bloom. If you can't find it, you can email or call me. I'll send you that link. Lots and lots of great people there connecting. I know that there's going to be more of these in the future as more things happen and change. Just kind of hang in there, everyone. Reach out. I think that's great advice to different people. And I want to thank everyone who joined us. And again, thank you to the panel. We will have this available at some point tomorrow. If you'd like to share it, take a look out for the link or reach out to us. Have a great evening, everyone, and take care of yourself.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.